Lando Norris and Piastri have just unleashed their most explosive reaction of the season after new FIA findings from Las Vegas revealed microscopic plank violations that both drivers now see as the moment their entire championship effort collapsed from inside their own team. The FIA inspection recorded their skid blocks below the legal 9mm limit by margins thinner than a human eyelash, and these values were confirmed repeatedly with precision to 1,000th of a millimeter, leaving McLaren with no argument and no escape from disqualification. When Norris and Piastri learned that both cars produced nearly identical illegal wear patterns, they confronted the engineering staff demanding to know how a setup so risky passed through preparations and why no one saw the warning signs that destroyed their race before it even began. And before we break down every detail of this internal explosion, make sure you subscribe right now, because the revelations coming next will reshape the entire 2025 championship and you do not want to miss what happens next. The shock inside McLaren began the moment the FIA released the post-race inspection sheet from Las Vegas confirming that both Norris and Piastri had failed the mandatory plank thickness requirement. The FIA document states that the underside of the car must remain at or above 9mm in all designated zones. When the inspectors measured Piastri's car, they recorded 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90, values gathered with an instrument accurate to 1,000th of a millimeter. This level of precision meant the findings could not be softened, questioned, or attributed to accidental variation. It was a clear breach of the regulation. The tension amplified when the FIA moved on to Norris's car and found that his readings fell below the limit as well. His plank measured 8.88 and 8.93, and these figures remained unchanged through repeated checks. With both cars producing nearly identical illegal values, the FIA concluded that this was not the result of random incidents but a systemic setup error that affected the entire team. McLaren representatives watching the inspection realized immediately that there was no procedural fallback, no mitigating argument, and no possibility of retaining the race results. The rule is absolute. If the plank drops below 9mm, the car is illegal. This revelation hit the drivers with a level of force that went beyond disappointment. Both Norris and Piastri had executed clean races without severe off-track moments and without strategic errors. They felt they had delivered exactly what the team needed at a critical point in the season. The disqualification therefore felt disconnected from anything they had control over. Their racecraft and their judgment had not failed. Instead, the failure lived in a setup decision made before the lights went out. Seeing that the race was lost not through driving but through an invisible technical detail created the emotional spark that pushed both drivers into confrontation. The FIA then recalculated the championship standings, and the full cost of the violation became clear. Norris, who had been set to strengthen his position with a second-place finish, instead dropped to 390 points. Piastri lost his own points haul, falling to 366. Verstappen, untouched by the controversy, matched Piastri's total and closed dramatically on Norris. For the team, this meant the Las Vegas race no longer existed in the standings. For the drivers, it meant that a weekend they believed had secured their advantage instead stripped it away entirely. That reversal deepened the frustration and fueled anger inside the garage. The engineering team attempted to explain that their ride height calculations had been compromised by disrupted practice sessions earlier in the weekend. They had been unable to gather reliable data on suspension compression and floor load over long runs, which forced them to estimate plank wear rather than confirm it. But the FIA reiterated that context does not alter the regulation. The only data that matters is the final measurement taken after the race. This made the drivers feel as if their fate had been sealed long before the race began, because the setup they were given had effectively guaranteed a violation under race conditions. When Norris and Piastri learned that both cars displayed almost perfectly matching illegal wear patterns, they recognized immediately that this was not a case of misfortune or a rare anomaly. It was the result of an engineering approach that left no safety margin for the plank in one of the most demanding circuits on the calendar. For the drivers, this felt like a structural breakdown in preparation, the kind of internal failure that can derail a championship. In that moment, the frustration became something sharper. It was the sense that their effort had been undone by a technical decision made in the garage, and the consequences were so severe that it resembled sabotage even if unintentional. The core problem that detonated the collapse of McLaren's Las Vegas weekend surfaced the moment the FIA confirmed that both cars had breached the 9mm plank regulation. The inspection of Norris's skid block delivered readings of 8.88 and 8.93, values that were measured with a device capable of detecting differences as small as 1,000th of a millimeter. These numbers remained unchanged through multiple checks, which meant the violation was not a borderline case or the product of random deviation. It was a clear and repeatable breach of a rule that the FIA treats as absolute across every circuit. The The severity of the situation escalated further when the FIA released the readings from Piastri's car. His plank showed 8.96, 8.74 and 8.90 at the reference positions, almost mirroring Norris's data. This symmetry demonstrated that the violation was not caused by an isolated incident such as a curb strike or a single moment of bottoming out. Instead, it pointed directly toward the engineering setup chosen before the start of the race. This is why the drivers reacted with such intensity. They understood immediately that the issue came from the garage, not the track. Norris and Piastri both believed they had delivered the exact performances required to protect their championship interest. Their laps were controlled, precise and free of heavy impacts that would explain such a failure. They both managed tire behavior in the cold conditions and executed their strategies without exposing the floor to unnecessary risk. The fact that both cars failed despite such disciplined driving created an emotional rupture. For the drivers, this was not a case of losing a race. It was a case of losing trust in the technical preparation that should have supported their efforts. The FIA document left no avenue for argument or mitigation. The regulation governing plank thickness does not consider factors such as disrupted practice sessions, ride height uncertainty, or the difficulty of predicting chassis compression at a new street circuit. The only determinant of legality is the final measurement taken after the race. This made the penalty unavoidable. Norris and Piastri realized that no explanation from the engineering side could change the outcome. Their race results were gone and the rulebook did not allow any flexibility. The championship consequences made the situation even more volatile. Norris watched 20 points vanish from his total as his second-place finish was erased. What should have been a weekend that strengthened his title campaign instead left him at 390 points. Piastri lost his entire points haul as well, falling to 366. Verstappen, unaffected by the disqualification, matched Piastri's total and closed the gap dramatically on Norris. When the drivers saw the standings rewritten before their eyes, the emotional impact deepened from frustration to disbelief. The last blow came when the team confirmed to the drivers that the wear pattern on both cars was nearly identical. That single detail told them that the engineering group had pushed the plank tolerance too close to the minimum without the data necessary to justify such a narrow margin. For the drivers, this mistake carried the weight of an internal collapse. It felt like the team had unintentionally created a situation where their own setup had sabotaged their championship prospects. The moment they understood that this was not misfortune but a preventable internal failure is the moment their anger reached its peak. The engineering crisis inside McLaren became undeniable once the FIA confirmed that both cars breached the 9mm plank rule by nearly identical margins, proving the issue came from the internal setup rather than anything that happened on track. The measurement of 8.88 on Norris's car and 8.74 on Piastri's car revealed that the floor had been operating at a dangerously low height for the entire race. The engineering group understood instantly that this meant they had miscalculated the vertical load that the Las Vegas circuit would apply, especially across its long straights where aerodynamic compression is at its highest. The moment those numbers were shown to the drivers, the atmosphere changed completely. One of the central engineering failures stemmed from the limited practice data collected earlier in the weekend. The document notes that the weekend included interruptions that prevented the team from gathering the usual long-run information required to validate how the car behaves under full race fuel. Without these long runs, the engineers had to estimate how much the chassis would compress at maximum speed. However, Las Vegas is a track where small miscalculations turn into major consequences because the floor operates within millimeters of the ground. This lack of data turned the race into a risk that the team did not fully appreciate until the FIA presented the final measurements. The engineers later explained that the cold night temperatures also played a role in lowering the effective ride height. As tire pressure drops, the car sits slightly closer to the track surface, and over a full Grand Prix distance that small drop turns into measurable plank wear. But the FIA made it clear that these factors do not alter the regulation. Even if temperature conditions worsen or the track surface produces more compression than expected, the car must remain above 9mm. That is why their measurements were repeated in front of McLaren staff with absolute consistency. The rulebook does not consider intention or environmental difficulty. It considers the number alone. The drivers grew more frustrated when they learned that Piastri's car showed an even more severe reading than Norris's, reaching 8.74mm at its lowest point. This proved that the setup error was systemic and embedded into both cars equally. To Norris and Piastri, this was not a case of one car hitting a bump or suffering an isolated issue. It was a structural misjudgment that affected both cars in the same way and therefore could only have come from the pre-race engineering process. This is why their reaction was immediate and intense. They felt the team had unknowingly placed them in a position with zero chance of keeping their results. Another source of anger came from the lack of protective margin built into the setup. Experienced teams often leave a safety buffer so that even under extreme track conditions the plank remains within legal range. McLaren instead ran a configuration that left the floor extremely close to the 9mm minimum. Without complete practice data, this was a dangerous approach. As soon as the race reached full speed and the aerodynamic load reached its highest, the plank began to wear faster than anticipated. Both drivers looked at the numbers and understood that a more conservative setup would have prevented the disqualification entirely. That realization cut deeply.